And the world of the Quran is calling upon something. The Quran is commenting on something, and it's to really understand it, you have to put yourself in it. You have to enter it.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Allah is talking about the pharaohs. Firaun spoke. Firaun said this.
Yeah.
I need to study some ancient Egyptian Egyptology. I want to know what the pharaohs were like. I want to know how they dressed, what their courtroom looked like. What can I gather about the pharaohs? I want to put myself in the pharaoh's court.
Yeah.
Right? Allah is talking about winds. Right? When I was studying Surah Al-Dhariyat, I spent 2 weeks, I think, looking at winds, papers on wind, and how wind works, and how, because Allah says winds carry. It's like, what are they carrying? Okay, they carry clouds, but Mufassir mentioned they carry clouds, they carry dust. It's like, how do they carry dust? I didn't know that, volcanic ash from around the world can end up like you can have sand from the Sahara
Ends up in Southern America.
It ends up in the beach of Florida.
Yeah.
Like وَالذَّارِيَاتِ ذَرْوًا.
Yeah.
Right? So then it gives you a new meaning to the ayah. أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يَأْتِي بِكُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا. Wherever you may be, Allah will bring you back. Because I'm going to die, my body's going to decay, part of my body's going to become dust particles, and they're going to fly all over the place. They're going to be everywhere eventually. Allah says, wherever you may be, He'll bring you all back. SubhanAllah. Like it just, so your contemplation on what Allah is saying gets so heavy when you decide to stop and think about the world He's inviting you to explore. Like this most recent one that's on my mind is Surah Al-Qiyamah, because I just finished it. And Allah said the guilty conscience. He swore by the guilty conscience, and nafs al-lawama, the self that blames.
Yeah.
So I said, I can't understand the guilty conscience until I understand conscience. And I can't understand conscience until I study conscience. So I started studying conscience. I looked at conscience from the Islamic perspective, the Quran, the historical perspective, the theological perspective, the Christian, Jewish perspective on conscience. Then I looked at the philosophical perspective on conscience. Then I looked at postmodern conscience discussions. How does Freud describe conscience? How were philosophers or scientists even pre quantum physics describing consciousness? And how are they describing it post? How are evolutionary biologists describing consciousness? And I'm just looking at this entire spectrum, and I'm thinking, how is the Quran responding to this? How is the Quran responding to all of this, right? And I read some amazing books on the subject written by Muslim intellectuals. That just absolutely mind-blowing stuff. Right?
Give us one.
My favorite one, Ideology of the Future by Muhammad Rafiuddin. It'll blow your mind. It will blow your mind. Book was written between the 40s and the 50s, and you would think it was written yesterday. It's just next level stuff. But anyway, so it took me down into that world, the world of conscience. And because Allah put that at the onset. It's called Bara'at Istihlal in Balagha, like a grand opening. The surah has a grand opening where He took two grand ideas, Yawm al-Qiyamah and a Nafs al-Lawama. And now the rest of the surah, right? So it's like those two ideas are echoing throughout the surah.
This is where you would like really benefit from expertise in subjects, like where you have the guy, when you're talking about anything that do biology, the guy who's a doctor starts giving you X, Y, Z.
That's
thing.
right.
The guy who's a civil engineer says, oh, like my dad, he was reading the end of Surah Al-Mulk. It says the water will go down and you won't be able to bring it back out fresh. And he's like, when I was younger, I was like, we can put wells and drills and whatever. It's not a big deal. But he's in water irrigation. He's like, oh yeah, you can't get it back fresh though. If it goes down, you lose that. Like you're gonna have all this
Subhanallah.
yeah. So he's like, oh yeah, that now makes total sense why Allah said it that way, as opposed to just saying like the water goes away.
See, an engineer would see that, and you and I wouldn't see that. The same way I was talking about, it was Surah Al-Najm, and I was talking about it in Dallas, and there was actually somebody who works in neurology, and he works in genetics, and they had done a lot of research on something within the genome that I'm going to butcher this because I have no background, but basically there's some kind of a capsule we all have in our cells. That's the death gene, and it starts slowly releasing, and that's part of how death starts happening slowly.
Let's have like the DNA strands, the telomeres at the end, they get shorter over time.
Yeah,
so the DNA is like
so
dying out.
There's research on how to keep it from releasing so that we can have longevity and not die, basically, right? And every time they try to mess with it, it expedites death. SubhanAllah. So,
Pandora's box.
yeah,
They open it
and
up just because it works.
I couldn't have known that, and he
Yeah.
comes and he tells me, and then there was another really interesting. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Ala comes from Ilya, and it's in Surah Al-Najm too. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكَ تَتَمَارَى. Right, Ilya, something, and Ilya is the joint of the thumb. Is
Interesting.
Ilya,
Okay.
and from it came etymologically came the idea of doing something unique that nobody else has done. Came ala, and a couple of people that were doing evolutionary biology, like the opposable thumb,
Yeah.
actually allowed us to grab tools in ways that
No one
nobody
else
else.
can.
And it's Allah is drawing that parallel and saying Allah does things that nobody else can do.
Oh, very interesting.
Subhanallah. Right?
Okay, for the sake of time, so if people want, there's a playlist online that you can go through these like in much more depth.
Yeah.
I do want to for the sake of time. The next one was personal experience, which I
Yeah.
think kind of speaks to itself, where you live life and something traumatic happens. So, for example, I cannot understand what it's like to put my child in a basket down the river if I don't have a kid or if I'm not a mom. Like it won't hit me the same way.
Right.
And even a woman, so she's like, she reads it when she's younger. She says, okay, that's interesting. Oh, it's tragic. Then she has a kid and she reads the ayah about Musa's mom throwing in the river. Like, oh my God. Now she might start crying in a way I could never connect with.
Right. Right. Or she has a memory of her son almost drowning in the swimming
There you go.
pool or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And it hits her very differently. So there are experience, and again, because Surah Al-Qiyamah is in my head, so much study of the language, the etymology, the tafasir, the extra Quranic literature, like I just referred to. And then at the end of it all, Allah says, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِيرًا. Human being has full view of themselves, no matter how many excuses they cast out. I can be defensive about myself, but I know my dark places. I know my mistakes. And the world doesn't have to see them, but I know them. I have to be honest with myself, right? And it's like this really stark look in the mirror when you're reading Surah Al-Qiyamah, right? And even this image of people are dying, people are crying for you on Judgment Day, begging, can we find a doctor? Can we find somebody to chant something on this person? Qila man raq. Qila suggests that it's not the person, because that would have been qala man raq. Allah says qila man raq. It will be said. Could have been said by him, the person dying, but it's being said by their loved ones, everybody.
Yeah.
Right? It could even be the angels are saying it in a sense, who's going to help you now? Like it's being said by the angels. You still think you can get a doctor? It's almost like that. So it has multiple layers, right? But on Judgment Day, when he says Ayn al-Mafar, earlier on, he doesn't say Waqila Ayn al-Mafar. He says Yaqulu al-insan yawma idhin. The human being will say, where's the escape?